peace, gratitude, and highest heart. It's time for the YouTube live reading. The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. So now, it's time for Chapter 6, Rejuvenation Through Joy. I welcome you all reading with me. This is a very telltale story about trying to do good. Rejuvenation Through Joy, Chapter 6. Mr. Eugene Lachey in a morning coat, handsome beyond words, stood on the platform of the main ballroom of the big hotel facing Central Park at 59th Street, New York. He stood there speaking in a deep, smooth voice, with a slight drawl to 1,000 well-dressed women and some 200 or 300 men who packed the place. His subject was motion and joy. At the last of his series of 6 Friday morning lectures, each of which had to do with something and joy. As the hour of his last lecture approached, expensive chauffeured motors turned on off Fifth Avenue, circled around from the park, drew up at the 59th Street entrance, discharged women. In the elevators leading to the level of the hotel ballroom, delicate foreign perfumes on the breast of preferred ladies scented the bronze cars. I've just heard of it this week. Everybody's talking about him. Did you hear him before? My dear, I shall have heard all 6. He sent me an announcement. Oh, why didn't I? He's marvelous. I simply can't tell you. The great Lachey speaking. As he spoke, 1,000 pairs of feminine eyes gazed as one. The men gazed too. Hundreds of ears heard. Entranced. Relax and be happy. Let Lachey tell you how to live. Lachey knows. Look at Lachey in the morning coat, strong and handsome, right here before you. Listen. Peace, peace. Hi, Charlie. At $2.50 a seat, how little for this message, they listened. Joy, said the great Lachey. What is life without joy? And how can we find you? Not through sitting still with our world of troubles on our minds, not through taking thought. Too often, only another phrase for brooding, not by the sedentary study of books or pamphlets, of philosophies and creeds, of ancient lore, not through listening to me lecture or listening to any other person lecture. This was the last talk of the series. But only through motion, through joyous motion, through life in motion. Lift your arms up to the sun, said Lachey. Lift them up now, right now, appealing to his audience. Up, up, up. 1,000 pairs of female arms and some few hundred men's were lifted up to the great rustle and movement, then and there, toward the sun. They were really lifted up toward Lachey, because nobody knew quite where the sun was in the crowded ballroom. Besides, all eyes were on Lachey. Splendid, the big black-haired young man on the platform said. Beautiful and splendid. That's what life is, a movement up. He paused, but not always up. The trees point toward the sun, but they also sway in the wind, joyous in the wind. Keep your hands skyward, said Lachey. Sway, everyone. Everybody, sway to the left, to the right, like trees in the wind, sway. And the huge audience began, at Lachey's command, to sway. Feet on the floor, he said, Lachey. Sway. He stood swaying too. Now, said Lachey, suddenly, stop. Try to move your hips. Oh, you cannot. Seated as you are in chairs, you cannot. The life center of the balance point cannot move in a chair. That is one of the great crimes of modern life, one of the murders of ourselves. We sit too much in chairs. We need to stand up. No, not now, my friends. Some were already standing. Not just when you are listening to me. I'm speaking now of way of life. We need to live up, point ourselves at the sun, sway in the wind of our rhythms, walk to an inner and outer music, put our balance points in motion. Do you not remember my talk on music and joy? Primitive man never sits in chairs. Look at the Indians. Look at the Negroes. They know how to move from the feet up, from the head down. Their centers live. They walk, they stand, they dance to the drum beats, their earth rhythms. They squat, they kneel, they lie, but they never, in their natural states, never sit in chairs. They do not mood and brood. No, they live through motion, through movement, through music, through joy. Remember my lecture, Negroes and Joy? Ladies and gentlemen, I offer you today rejuvenation through joy. Peace. Highest heart love. Thank you guys for reading with us. This is chapter 6, Rejuvenation Through Joy, The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. Lachey bowed and bowed as he left the platform. With the greatest of grace, he returned to bow again, to applause that was thunderous, to a ballroom that was full of well-dressed women and cultured men. He bowed and bowed, black-haired and handsome. Beyond words, he bowed. The people were loath to let him go. Lachey had learned to bow that way in the circus. He used to drive the roan horses in the great Roman chariot races, but nobody in the big ballroom of the hotel knew that. The women thought surely, to judge from their acclaim, that he had come full-blown right out of heaven to bring them joy. Lachey knew what they thought, too, for within a month after the closing of his series of Friday morning lectures, they all received at their town addresses most beautifully written personal notes announcing the opening in Westchester of his colony of joy for the rebuilding of the mind, the body, and the soul. Unfortunately, we did not hear Lachey's lecture on Negroes and Joy, the third in the series, but he said, in substance, that Negroes were the happiest people on earth. He said that they alone really knew the secret of the rhythms and of movements. How futile, he said, to study Descartes in this age. Go instead, he said, to Cab Calloway, Bricktops, and Bill Robinson. Move to music, he said, to the gaily primitive rhythms of the first man. Be Adam again, be Eve. Be not afraid of life, which is a garden. Be all of this, not by turning back time, but merely by living to the true rhythm of our own age, to music as modern as today, yet old as life. Music that the primitive Negroes brought with their drums from Africa to America. That music, my friends, known to the vulgar as jazz, but which is so much more than jazz that we know not how to appreciate it. That music which is the joy of life. His letter explained that these rhythms would play a great part in leading those who would come along the path to joy. And at Lachey's initial Westchester colony, the leader of the music would be none other than the famous Happy Lane, a primitif de luxe, direct from the Moon Club in Harlem, with the finest Negro band in America. To be both smart and modern in approaching the body and soul was Lachey's aim, and to bring gaiety to a lot of people who had not known nothing more joyous than Gurdjieff, who was avowed intention for those who could pay for it. For Lachey's proposed path to life was not any less costly than that of now famous masters at the Fountain Blue. Indeed, it was even slightly more expensive. A great many ladies and gentlemen, too, who received Lachey's beautifully written letter grasped when they learned the size of the initial check they would have to draw in order to enter as a resident member of his colony of joy. Some gasped and did not pay because they could not, and so their lives went on without joy. Others gasped and paid, and several enough to ensure entirely Lachey's first season, paid without even gasping. These last were mostly old residents of Park Avenue or the better section of Germantown, ladies who had already tried everything looking towards happiness. Now they wanted to try joy, especially since it involved so new and novel a course as Lachey's proposed, including the gaiety of Harlem Negroes, of which most of them knew nothing except through the rather remote chatter of the younger set who had probably been to the Cotton Club. So Lachey opened up his house on an old estate in Westchester with a mansion and several cottages thereon that the crash let him lease for little or nothing, or rather, Soul, his manager, did the leasing. Instead of chairs, they bought African stools. Now, low, narrow, and backless. I got the best decorator in town, too, said Soul, to do it over primitive, modernistic, on a percentage of the profits, if there are any. It's gotta be comfortable, said Lachey, so people can relax after they get through enjoying themselves. It'll be, said Soul. West Fifth of we're admitting nobody west of Fifth Avenue, said Lachey. No Broadwayites, said Soul. Certainly not, said Lachey. Only people with souls to save, and enough Harlemites to save them. Ha, ha, said Soul. All the attendants were French maids, butlers, and pages. Lachey's two assistants were a healthy and hard young woman, to whom he had once been married, a Hollywood Swede with Jean Harlow hair, a young Yale man who hadn't graduated, but who read Ronald Furbank seriously, adored Louis Armstrong, worshipped Dwight Fisk, and had written Lachey's 500 personal letters in a seven lively arts Gilbert Seldes style. Soul, of course, handled the money, with a staff of secretaries, bookkeepers, and managers, and Happy Lane's African band, two tap dancers, and a real blues singer, were contracted to spread joy and act as the primordial pulse beat of the house. In other words, they were to furnish the primitive. Within a month after the colony opened in mid January, its resident guests numbered 35. Applications were legion. The demand for places was very great. The price went up. It's unbelievable how many people with money are unhappy, said Soul. It's unbelievable how they need what we got, drawled Lachey. The press agents wrote marvelous stories about Lachey, how he had long been in his youth at Del Monte, a student of the occult, how he had turned from that to the primitive and through Africa and discovered the curative values of Negro jazz. The truth was quite otherwise. Lachey had first worked in a circus. He rode a Roman chariot in the finale. All the way across USA, he rode twice daily, from Indianapolis, where he got the job, to Los Angeles, where he quit because nobody knew him there, and he liked the swimming at Santa Monica. And because he soon found a softer job posing for the members of the modernistic art colony who were modeling and painting away under a most expensive teacher at the nearby resort, saving their souls through art. Lachey ate oranges and posed and swam all that summer and met a lot of nice, rich, and slightly faded women. New kind of people for him, cultured people. He met, among others, Mrs. Oscar Willis of New Haven, one of the members of this colony of art expression was one of the colony of art expression. Her husband owned a railroad. She was very unhappy. She was lonely in her soul, and her pictures expressed the loneliness. She invented Lachey to tea at her bungalow near the beach. Lachey taught her to swim. After that, she was less unhappy. She began a new study in the painting class. She painted a circle and called it her impression of Lachey. It was hard to get it just right, so she asked him to do some extra posing for her in the late afternoons. She paid him very well, but summers and seasonal art classes too, and Mrs. Willis went back east. Lachey worked in the movies as an extra. He played football for football pictures, played gigolos for society films, played a sailor, a caveman, a cop. He studied tap dancing. He did pretty well for as far as earning money went and had lots of time for cocktails, parties, and books. Met lots of women. He liked to read. He'd been a bright boy in high school back home in South Bend, and now at Tees out Wilshire Way, he learned what one ought to read and what one ought to have read. He spent money on books. Women spent money on him. He swam enough to keep a good body, drank enough to be a good fellow, acted well enough to have a job at the studios occasionally. He got married twice, but the other women were jealous, so divorces followed. Then his friend Sol Blum had an idea. Sol ran a gym for the Hollywood elite. He had a newly opened swimming pool that wasn't doing so well. He asked Lachey if he would take charge of the lessons. Don't hurt yourself working. Just swim around a little and show them that it looks easy. And be nice to the women. Soul said, let's get the class. Peace, peace, y'all. Gratitude and eyes, heart love. Look at this. We got it. Chapter 6. We're going. This is a pretty long chapter, too, so we're running through it, y'all. And thank you. It's rejuvenation through joy. So Soul is now having an idea he's about to give to Lachey. Okay, here we go. He's working a gym in Hollywood. Don't hurt yourself working, you know? Just swim around a little and show them that it looks easy. And be nice to the women, Soul said. The swimming courses boomed. The fees went up. Soul and Lachey made money. Lachey got a percentage cut. He swam more and drank less. His body was swell, even if liquor and women parties and studio lights had made his face a little hard. But he's so damn nice, the women would say, who took swimming lessons for no good reasons but to be held up by the black-haired Lachey. Then one summer, Lachey and Soul closed the gym and went to Paris. They drank an awful lot of liquor at Harry's bar, and at Bricktops, they met an American woman who was giving a farewell party. She was Mrs. Oscar Willis, the artist, again, a long way from California. What's the idea? Said Lachey. Are you committing suicide, Mrs. Willis, or going home, or what? Why a farewell party? I'm retiring from life, said Mrs. Willis, shouting above from the frenzy of the Negro band. I'm giving up art. I'm going to look for happiness. I'm going into the colony near Digne. Whose colony? Said Lachey. He remembered how much colonies cost, thinking of the art group. Mogadar Bonat's colony, said Mrs. Willis. He's a very great Slav who can do so much for the soul. Art does nothing. Only one must agree to stay there 6 months when one goes. It is expensive, Lachey asked delicately. Is it expensive? I'm feeling awfully tired too. Only $30 a day, said Mrs. Willis. Have a drink. They drank a lot of champagne and said farewell to Mrs. Willis, while the jazz band boomed and Bricktop shouted an occasional blues. Then Soul had an idea. After all, he was tired of gyms. Why not start a colony? He mentioned it to Lachey when they got out into the open air. Hell yes, said Lachey as they crossed Pigalle. Let's start a colony. From then on, in Paris, Soul and Lachey studied soul cults. By night, they went to Montmartre. By day, they read occult books and thought how much people need to retire and find beauty and pay for it. By night, they danced in the Negro jazz bands, and all the time they thought how greatly they needed a colony. Peace, peace. Page 79, going to page 80. The ways of white folks. Rejuvenation of through joy. We're at chapter 6. We're going through. We're going chapter each live post, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. Yes, I love you. Keep up the grind, OG. I love you. Thank you so much. You see how much people pay that guy, Bonats, said Soul. Mm-hmm, said Lachey, drinking from a tall glass of Josephine's. And you see how much they'll spend on Harlem Jazz even in Paris? Yeah, said Soul. We're spending it ourselves. But what's that got to do with the colonies? Looks like to me, said Lachey, a sure way to make money would be combine a jazz band and a soul colony and let it roll from there. Black rhythm and happy souls. I see, said Soul. That's not as silly as it sounds. Let 'em be mystic and have fun too, said Lachey. What do you mean mystic? Said Soul. Highbrow fun, said Lachey. Like they get from Bonats. What do you suppose he's got we can't get? Nothing, said Soul, who learned to sell ideas in Hollywood. Now you got the personality. With me for manager, a jazz band for background, and a little showmanship, it could be a riot. A riot is right, said Lachey. Then they returned to America. They stayed in New York. Soul got hold of a secretary who knew a lot of rich addresses and some rich people. Together, they got a hold of a smart young man from Yale who prepared a program of action for a highbrow cult of joy, featuring the primitive. Then they got ready to open a colony. Peace, peace. Reading of Rejuvenation Through Joy, The Ways of White Folks. Langston Hughes. They cabled Mrs. Willis at Digny for the names of some of her friends who might need their souls fixed up in America. They sent out a little folder, and they had the young Yale man write a few articles on contentment and Aboriginal rhythms for Lachey to try on the highbrow magazines. They really had a lot of nerve. Lachey learned his lectures by heart that the college boy wrote, then improvised, added variations of his own, made them personal, and bought a morning coat. Nightly, he went to Harlem, brushing up on the newer rhythms. In November, they opened a cold in the grand ballroom of the hotel facing the park without even a tryout elsewhere. 6 lectures by Eugene Lachey on joy in relation to the mind, body, and soul. Might as well take a big chance, said Soul. Win or lose. They won. In Soul's language, they wowed them. When the Friday morning series began, the ballroom was half full. When it ended, it was crowded, and Soul had already signed the lease for the old Westchester estate. So many were in need of rejuvenating their souls and could seemingly still afford to pay for it that Soul gave up the idea for returning immediately to his gym in Hollywood. Souls seem more important than bodies. Peace, peace, highest heart, love. Thank you so much. Much love. Peace. Oh, that's love. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. How about it, Lachey? The Intelligentista dubbed their highly publicized efforts neo-paganism. Others called it one more return to the primitive. Others said out loud it was a gyp game. Some said the world was turning passionate and spiritual. Some said it was merely a sign of the decadence of the times. But everybody talked about it. The papers began to write about it, and the magazines that winter, from the Junior League Bulletin to the Nation of even the new masses remarked, usually snootily, but nevertheless remarked about this cult of joy. Harlem hedonism, the forum called it. Lachey's publicity men who'd started it all demanded higher wages, so Soul fired them. The thing went rolling of its own accord. The world was aware of joy. The Westchester colony prospered. 10 days before the January opening of the colony, the huge mansion of the once aristocratic estate hummed with activity. It looked like a Broadway theater before a premiere. Decorators were working for big effects. They hoped House and Garden, Vogue, and Vanity Fair would picturize their super modernistic results. The house manager, a former hotel head out of work, was busy getting his staff together, trying to keep them French for the swank of it. The bedrooms were receiving special attention. At Lachey's, sleep also was to be a joy, and each private bathroom was being fitted with those special apparatuses at colonies necessary for the cleansing of the body. For Soul and Lachey had hired a doctor to tell them what the best cults use. Body and soul, said Soul. Body and soul. Give me the body, said Lachey, and let the Yale man take care of the soul. Occult assistants, chefs and waitresses, masseurs, and hairdressers began to arrive, for the house was to be fully staffed, and there were plenty of first class people out of work and willing to take a chance too. Upstairs in the third floor room, Lachey, like an actor preparing for a role, studied his lectures word for word. His former wife listened to him daily, she reciting them by heart, puzzling over their allusions. In another room, the Yale man, surrounded by books on the primitive art, spiritual guidance, Negro jazz, German eurythmics, psychoanalysis, yogi philosophy, all of the Krishnamurti, half of the Havelock, Ellis, and more, most of Freud, besides piles of spirituals, jazz records, Paul Robeson, and Ethel Waters, and in the midst of all this, a typewriter. There sat the Yale man creating lectures, preparing for a month in advance, 20-minute daily talks for the great Lachey. On the day when the Negroes arrived for their rehearsals, just prior to the opening of the place, Soul gave them a lecture. Fellows, he said, addressing the band and Miss Lucas, to the blues singing little coal black dancer. Listen, now I want to tell you about this place. This will not be no nightclub, nor will it be a dance hall. This place is more like a church. It's for the rebuilding of souls and bodies. It's for helping people. People who are wore out and tired, sick and bored, annuied, in other words, annuied, in other words, will come here for treatments, the kind of treatments that Mr. Lachey and I have devised, which includes music, the best music, jazz, real primitive jazz out of Africa. You know, Harlem, to help them learn to move, to walk, to live in harmony with their times and themselves. Now, I want you all to be ladies and gentlemen. I know you are. To play with abandon, to give them all you got. But don't treat this like a roughhouse, nor like no moon club either. We allow only champagne drinkers here, cultured ladies, nice gentlemen, the best, the very best. Park Avenue. You know what I mean? Now, this is the order of the day. In the morning at 11, Mr. Lachey will lecture in the Palm Garden, glass and clothes on the art of motion and rhythm. You, Miss Tulane Lucas, and you two tap dancers there will illustrate. You will show grace in modern movements, aliveness. The beat of Africa is expressed through the body. Mr. Lachey will illustrate you. He's one of Bill Robinson's disciples, you know. He's one of Bill Robinson's disciples, you know. You all know how tap dancing has preserved Bill, a man of his age, past 50. Well, we want to show our clients how it can preserve them. But don't do no stunts now. Just easy rhythm stuff. We got to start them off slow. Some of them is old, and I expect some is Christian Scientists. Then, in the late afternoon, we will have tea dancing, just for pleasure. We want to give them plenty of exercise so they won't be bored, and so they will eat. We expect to make money on our table and on massages too. In the evening, for 1 hour, put on the best show you got, singing and dancing. Every week we gon' bring up new specialties. Send them to bed feeling happy before Mr. Lachey gives his good night and sweet dreams talk. Now, you boys understand you'll be off early here by 10 or 11, not like at the club. You got your own cottage here on the estate to live in. You got your cars. Don't mind you driving to town if you want to. But I want you back here for the 11 o'clock services in the morning. And I don't want you sleepy either. This house is dedicated to joy, and all who work here have got to be bright and snappy. That's what our people are paying for. Lachey, where is Lachey, Miss Boxell? The secretary looked startled. He was in the halls talking to the new French maids. Well, get him in here. Tell him to explain to these boys how he wants to fix up his routine for his lectures. Let's get down to business now. What kind of clothes you want us to wear? Happy Lane, the Negro leader asked. Red, said Soul. Red. Red is the color of joy. Lord, said the blues singer, I'm too dark to wear red. That's what we want, said Soul. Darkness and light. We want to show them how much light there is in darkness. Now here, said the blues singer to herself, I don't like no white folks talking about me being dark. Lachey. Lachey, Soul called to his partner strolling in through the door. Let's get going. Okay, Lachey said. Where's my boy? Meaning the Yale man. Right here, Gene. Now, how goes the first lecture go? My God, said Soul. The Yale man referred to his notes. Joy, he read. Joy springing from the dark rhythm of the primitive. Oh, yes, said Lachey, turning to the band. Now for that, give me mood indigo. You know, soft and syncopated. Moan it soft and low. Then you, Miss Lucas, to the dancer, you come gliding on. Give it plenty hip movement. I want them to learn how to use their life center. Then I'm going to say, what's that, boyfriend? To the Yale man. See how the, oh yes, see how the Negroes live dark as the earth, the primitive earth, swaying like the trees rooted in the deepest source of life. Then I'm going to have them all rise and sway like Miss Lucas here. That ought to keep them from being bored until lunchtime. Peace. Lord, said Miss Lucas, muttering to herself, what is this? A dancing school or Sunday school? And louder. All right. Mr. Lachey sounds like it might be a good act. Act nothing, said Soul. This is the art of life. Must be if you say so, said Miss Lucas. Well, let's go, commanded the great Lachey. Let's rehearse the first lecture now. Come on, boys. The jazz band began to cry Mood Indigo in the best manner of the immortal Duke Ellington. Lachey began to speak in his great soft voice. Bushy-haired Tulane Lucas began to glide across the floor. God damn, said Soul. It's worth the money. Hey, hey, said Miss Lucas. Shh, said Lachey. Shh, be dignified. Rooted in the deepest source of life. Oh, early soul in motion, prompted the Yale man. Oh, early soul, intoned Lachey. The amazing collection of people gathered together in the colony of joy astounded even Lachey, whose very blaseness was what really made him appear so fresh. His 37 clients in residence came almost all from families high in the social register and equally high in the financial world. When Mrs. Carlos Gleed's check of entrance came in, Soul said, Boy, we're made for our society. Could be no higher. Blue blood straight out of Back Bay. The opening of the colony created a furor among all the smart neurosthetics, neurosthetics from Park Avenue right on up to New England. Dozens applied too late and failed to get in. Others drove up daily for their lectures. Of those who came, some had belonged formerly to the self-denial cults, others of Gurdjieff. Others had been analyzed in the Park, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and consulted Adler and Hirschfeld, Freud. Some had studied under the famous yogi. Others had been at Nyack. Now they had come to the colony of joy. Up and down Park Avenue, miraculous gossip flew. Why, Mrs. Charles Duveen Outhouse of Newport and Paris, feeling bad for years, is said to look like a cherub since she's gone into the colony. My dear, the famous Oriental fan painter, Van Comer Jones, he's another man these days. The rhythms, he says, the rhythms have worked wonders. And just the very presence of Lachey. Nothing America has ever known. Rumor flew about the penthouses of the East River. Nothing is equal to it. The Baroness Langston gasped in a letter to a talkative friend. My God, it's marvelous. Far better than the Indian thought. Miss Joan Reeves, the heiress of Meadowbrook, was said to have had said by her best friends, the movement is amazing. Almost all of them had belonged to cults before, cults that had never satisfied. Some had even been injured by them. To a cult that based the soul search on self-denial. Self-denial. Deny what you like best. Have it all around you all the time, but never touch it. Never. Then you will become strong. Mrs. Duveen Outhouse had belonged. She denied chocolates for a whole year, kept fresh candy sitting in each corner of her boudoir, resisted with all her soul, and at the end of the year was a wreck. Mr. Jones, the fan painter, had belonged to a group of on Cape Cod that believed in change through change. That is, whatever you want to be, you can. And all the members, after they paid their fees, were told by the mystic master to change their names to whatever they most wished to be, or whoever, past or present, they admired. Some, without much depth, chose Napoleon or Cleopatra, but others, Daphne or Zeus or Mary DeVal. Mr. Jones chose horse. He'd always wanted to be an animal, to possess their strength and calm, their vigor, their ways. But after a whole summer at the Cape Cod, he was even less of a horse than before, and gently mosquito bitten. Mrs. Ken Prather II, a member of Lachey's group, had once spent months attired kneeling, holding her big toes behind her, deep in contemplation. A most handsome Indian came once a week to her home at East 64th for an enormous consideration and gave her lessons in silence and in positions of thought. But finally, she just couldn't stand it anymore. Others of the colony of joy had been scientists in their youth. Others had wandered, disappointed, the ways of spiritualism, never finding soulmates. Still others had gazed solemnly into crystals, but had seen nothing but darkness. Now they had come to joy. How did it happen that nobody before had ever offered them rejuvenation through joy? Why, that was what they had been looking for all these years. And who would have thought it might come through the amusing and delightful rhythms of Negroes? Nobody but Lachey. In the warm glass enclosed palm garden that winter, where the Cupid fountain had been replaced by an enlargement of an African plastic, and where a jazz band played soft and low behind the hedges, they felt, those who were there by virtue of their checkbooks, all a tremble in the depths of their souls after they had done their African exercises looking at Lachey. Those slow, slightly grotesque center swaying exercises that he and Tulane Lucas from the Moon Club had devised. When they had finished, the movement, the music, and Lachey's voice made them feel all warm and close to earth, and as though they never wanted to leave the colony of joy or to be away from their great leader again. Of course, there were a few left, but their places were soon filled by others more truly mystic, in the primitive sense, than those whose arteries had already hardened, and who somehow couldn't follow a modern path to happiness or sit on African stools. Clarence Lockard, for one, with his spine, had needed actual medical treatment, not to be found at the Colony of Joy, and Mrs. J. Northcliffe Hill in the 70s was a little too old for even the simple exercises that led to the center swaying. But for the two or three who went away, four or five came, and the house was full of life and soul. Every morning ensemble, they lifted up their hands to the sun when the earth drums rang out, and the sun was Lachey standing right there. Lachey was called the new leader. The Negro band master was known as happy men. The dancers were called the primitives. The drummer was ritualized as earth drummer, and the devotees were called new men, new women. For the Yale man had written in one of the lectures, and the old age rhythm of the earth as expressed by the drums is also the ever new rhythm of life. And all you who walk it to it, dance to it, live to it, are new men and new women. You shall call one another not by the old names, but only new man, new woman, new one. Forgetting the past, they called Lachey dear new leader. For, continued the gist of the particular lecture, newness, eternal renewal is the source of all growth, all life. And as we grow from day to day here in this colony, we shall ever new, ever joyous, and new. Gimme sweet jazz on that line, Lachey had instructed at rehearsals. So, on the thrilling morning of that lecture, the saxophones and the clarinets moaned so beautiful and low, the drum beats called behind the palms with such wistful syncopation that everybody felt impelled to move a new way, as Lachey said. Let us rise this morning and do a new dance, the dance of our new selves. And 39 life centers began to sway with the greatest of confidence in the palm court, for by now many inhibitions had fallen away, and the first exercise had been learned perfectly. Who knows how long all might have gone on splendidly with Lachey and Soul and their colony of joy, and not at a most unhappy monster had a had not a most unhappy monster entered to plague them. The monster that's in every man, wrote the Yale man later in his diary. The monster of jealousy came to break down joy, for the various new ones became jealous of Lachey. It's your fault, stormed Soul. Your fault. I told you to treat them all the same. I told you if you had to walk in the snow by the moonlight, walk with your used to be wife and leave the rest of these ladies alone. You know how women are. I told you not to start that private hour in the afternoon. I knew it would make trouble, create jealousy. For out of the private hour devoted to the problems of each new one, once a fortnight where Lachey never advised he couldn't, but merely received alone in confidence their troubles for contemplation. Out of this private hour, ere long, howls, screams, and recriminations were heard to issue almost daily. And in the late March, New Woman, Althouse, was known to have thrown an African mask at the new leader, Lachey, because he kept her waiting a whole hour overtime while he devoted his attentions to the Meadowbrook heiress, New Woman Reeves. My God, said Soul, the house is buzzing with scandal. I heard it all from Val Coomer Jones. These damn women, said Lachey. I gotta get rid of some of these women. You can't, said Soul. They've all paid. Well, I will, said Lachey. I'm tired. Why, even my divorced wife is in love with me again. Fire her, will you? Don't be foolish, said Soul. She's a good secretary. Well, I'm going to quit, said Lachey. You can't, said Soul. I got you under contract. Oh, yeah, said Lachey. Too much is enough. Oh, yeah, said Lachey. Too much is enough. And sometimes enough is too much. I'm tired, I tell you. So they fell out. But Lachey didn't quit. It might have been better if he had, for spring that year was all too sudden and full of implications. The very earth seemed to moan with excess of joy. Life was just too much to bear alone. It needed to be shared. Its beauty given to others, taken in return, its eternal newness united. To the colony, Lachey was their leader, their life, and they wanted him, each one alone. In desperation, he abolished the private hour, but that didn't help any. Mrs. Devine Outhouse was desperately in love with him now. She called him Pan. Miss Joan Reeves could not turn her eyes away. He was her god. Mrs. Carlos Gleed insisted he summer he he summer at the island place in Maine. Baroness Langstrun announced quite defi- definitely she intended to marry him. Whereupon Mrs. Outhouse, who had thrown the mask, threatened without ceremony to wring at once the Baroness's neck. Several other new ones stopped speaking to each other over Lachey. Even the men members were taking sides for or against Lachey or each other. That dear soul Van Comer Jones said he simply couldn't stand it anymore and left. In the city, the Broadway gossip columns got a hold of it. This excitement overjoyed and began to wisecrack. Then suddenly a minister started a crusade against the doings of the rich at the colony, and the tabloids sent men up to get pictures. Blackmailers, scenting scandal, began to blackmail. The righteous and the racketeers both sprang into action, and violets bloomed in April. Soul tore his hair. We're ruined. Who cares, said Lachey. Let's go back to the Hollywood gym. We made plenty on this. And I still got the Hispano Mrs. Hancock donated. But we could have made millions. We'll come back to it next year, said Lachey, and get some fresh new ones. I'm damn tired of these old ones. And they're so bickery. But the final fireworks were set off by Miss Tulane Lucas, the dusky female of the Primitives. They began over the Earth Drummer and really had nothing to do with the colony. But fire, once started, often spreads beyond control. Peace, peace, highest heart love, guys. We're doing it. This is beautiful. Page 96. The ways of white folks. Rejuvenation of joy. So now they've went through the colony, and this is how the climax comes in, how the colony is now going to dissipate. We hear Lachey is tired. The drummer belonged to Miss Lucas. But when spring came, he got a bad habit of driving down to New York after work every night and not getting back till morning. Another woman, said Tulane to herself, after all I've done, she warned him, but he paid her no mind. One April morning, just in time to play for the 11 o'clock lecture, with Lachey already on the platform, the little colored drummer arrived late, and without even having gone by the cottage to greet Tulane, rushed into the palm court and took his place at the earth drums. Oh no, said Tulane suddenly from among the palms. while all the new ones contemplating on their African stools started at the unwanted sound. "Oh, no, you don't," she said. "You have drummed your last time." And she took out a pistol from her bosom and shot. Pow! Bang! 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 Screams rent the palm court. The drummer fled. Bang! A bullet hit somewhere near his life center, but kept on. Pandemonium broke out. "My God," said Soul, "somebody grab that gun." But Mrs. Devine Outhouse beat him to it. From Tulane, she snatched the weapon for herself and approached the great Lachey. "How right to shoot the one you love," she cried. "How primitive, how just." And she pointed the gun directly at the dear leader. Again, shots rang out. Bang! One struck off a brass curve, off the brass bass horn, glanced upward toward the ceiling, and crashed through the glass of the sun court, showering slivers on everyone. But by that time, Baroness Langston had thrown herself on Devine Outhouse. "Awoo!" she screamed. "You wretch, shooting the man I love!" Her fingers sought the other's hair. Her nails tore at her eyes. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carlos gleed through an African stool. Mrs. Outhouse fired one more, but Lachey had gone. The final bullet hit only the marble floor, flew upward through the piano, sounded a futile chord. By this time, Soul had grabbed the gun. The screams died. Somebody separated the two women. Little French maids came running with water for the fainting. Little French maids came running with water for the fainting. Happy Lane emerged from behind the bass viol, pale as an African ghost, but nobody knew where the rest of the jazz band had disappeared, nor Lachey either. They were long gone. There was no lecture that morning. Indeed, there were never any more lectures. That was the end of the colony of joy. The newspapers laughed about it for weeks, published pictures and names of the wealthy inmates. The columnists wisecracked. It was all very terrible. As a final touch, one of the tabloids claimed to have discovered that the great Lachey was a Negro passing for white. That concludes the chapter 6 of The Ways of White Folks by Langston Hughes. I'm your moderator and narrator, Uriel, Neveu, Uriel Riley. Thank you for reading with us. Highest heart, love, and honor. Love to all the people. Thank you so much. Awesome, man. That is so awesome. Thank you. Yeah, man, we're doing it. Keep going. I'll be back next time. Much love. The story of Lachey. Trying to bring joy to the people. Yes. That's what's up. Yay. Thank you. We did it. Peace. Y'all have a good, wonderful day. great day. Peace, peace. I love y'all. Hi, sorry. Yes, yes, you did it. Thank you so much for being here. Peace.